We are all home all the time now. And I'm sure you've felt it. The lethargy of doing very little physical activity. The brain fuzziness of looking at only screens and the same four walls of your bedroom. And of course we need something to distract us, so what better place to turn than the internet? Hello. We're probably spending way more time on the internet than we ever used to now. I don't know if you can hear little Olive barking in the background, but he's weird. Regardless, I'm sure you're spending more time using the internet than you used to, even if it already was a lot. And now that we're all participating in a weird, isolating global experiment, it might be a good time to revisit the question, does the internet make us stupid? Misinformation. Hey y'all, welcome to Misinformation, the show that poses questions it can't answer and then tries anyway. For over a decade, there have been a growing number of voices from both academic and non-academic fields suggesting that the increasing amount of time we spend online is changing our brains. This is very probably true, but the internet is young, so we don't know that much yet. But even without knowing that much, the loudest and most respected voices on this topic seem determined to convince us that this change is a bad thing. Over the past few years, just out of my own interest, I've read some books on the subject, and time again, the conclusions for a lot of studies done have a very negative slant, or the conclusions that writers have about studies done have a negative slant. And this strikes me as odd, because the internet is not a one-dimensional thing. So I wanted to make a video about this. I am not going to actually come down on the side of the internet is good or bad for you. I think that would be a dumb claim to make in a video. Obviously, I'm a little biased as well. But I do want to point out some flaws in two articles from two respected publications. The first of these articles is from Fortune magazine, and the second of these is from Scientific American. The first article I want to talk about, or I guess kind of put down, is an article from Fortune. This article just straight up says the internet makes you stupid. It bases its argument off of a book called The Shallows, which I read a few years ago and is an okay book. The Shallows basically claims that because of hyperlinks and constant ads and pop-ups, etc., our brain is constantly being pulled in various directions online, making it very hard to pay attention. With these constant distractions, it says that we're learning information in a very superficial way, which makes it hard to remember stuff in the long term. These claims are based on studies done at universities and other institutions, and the research of those studies should be heeded. However, these studies can't really show the long-term effects the internet has on human brains because the internet just hasn't been around that long. Oh, no, not the beast! What I'm trying to demonstrate here is how much of an extrapolation this conclusion is. I was born in 1993, which is the same year that CERN released the World Wide Web into the public domain, which, to sum it up, is when the internet as we know it began.
So it begins.
To have in-depth knowledge on how the internet affects our brains, we need to have studies done on people who have grown up largely in the age of the internet. And we need to compare those results with studies on people who grew up without the internet. It's super likely that the way we learn and how we learn now is much different than it was before the internet. But does that difference matter, or are people still averaging out at roughly the same level of smarts as they were before? And when it comes to constant distractions, I'm willing to believe that ads and hyperlinks might degrade how we learn to some degree. But I'm curious if that's the case in your life. I remember and cite articles I read online all the time, so I'm definitely retaining that knowledge. Let me know in the comments if you find it difficult to remember stuff you learn online. The second article I want to talk about is a Scientific American article, which definitely takes a much more neutral approach to the whole topic of good or bad, but it definitely has a very limiting scope.
Choosing the right scope is a straightforward process.
The article talks about the internet and talks about technology in general as an extension of the self. In this point of view, the internet is less of its own thing and more of an add-on or plug-in for your psyche. So thinking about the internet as an extension, when you look at big tech companies, they really are extending their power and extending their knowledge through various data mining services that they provide to us. But are people extending their knowledge or reach? If you hop in the car and you're gonna go somewhere you've never been before, you might use your phone's GPS. Is your mind extended when you do that? Not really. The GPS does the thinking for us, and it records info about us while doing this. It knows where you go, and more importantly, it knows where you are in relation to certain billboards. It'll know if you're driving toward a specific ad at any point. You are obviously the sucker in this scenario. You You are not being extended in any way. Google is the one who is extending their knowledge about you, and you're just kind of getting taken for a ride.
However,
the Scientific American does not take this notion of extension very far. If we're going to use their framework and look at the internet and technology as an extension of the self, then it's important to think about what the internet actually is. On the most basic level, the internet has always been a method for communicating information and connecting people. Sure, we know this already because this is YouTube, but the author of this Scientific American article seems to have forgotten. The internet is certainly a tool used by sinister and powerful groups, but it's also a tool used to connect the rest of us. It's used to organize strikes, create communities, and even sometimes expose and uncover those aforementioned sinister powers. So all said and done, let's turn to the main query here. Does the internet make you a big dummy dum-dum? Maybe. It's more or less a certainty at this point that the internet is going to change how humans think, which is what all revolutionary technology has done. For example, the printing press allowed for the proliferation of written material, which meant that more and more people started reading. And this changed how people thought. Reading has to be done in a certain way. Whether you are reading left to right or right to left, reading forces the mind into a linear thought path. It has a beginning, it has an end, it has a punctuation mark. If you were a person alive before the printing press was invented, you probably could not read, like most people at that time. And that means you probably did not think about the world and think about your thoughts in terms of sentences. The way you think, the way you communicate, the way you learn are all shaped by the tools you use to do that. So learning through reading forces your mind into a certain pathway of knowledge. You are not only learning the information, but you are learning to think about it in a specific way. Similarly, if you are getting info online, which might be reading, it might be video or otherwise, the ecosystem of the internet and the tool you are using, that is the internet, is going to shape the way you internalize that knowledge. So there's really no question. The internet is already changing and will continue to change how humans think and how our brains develop. But it's still a very young technology. More studies need to be done over a longer period of time before a reasonable judgment can be made about this new tool. All we can say now is that the internet is making us different than how people were before. But different is not necessarily stupid.
Let me ask you a question. Are you stupid?
I am not stupid. I'm very intelligent.
Can you prove it?
Sure, shoot. Ask me a question.
Are you stupid?
And that's the info about that.